record when it comes to gender parity may come back to haunt the country in about 10 years' time. In a report on the state of gender inequality in India, the Mckinsey Global Institute says that if the situation does not improve, India's economic output could take a hit of up to $2.9 trillion by the year 2025. Here's a report.
India may have made some significant economic strides in the last few years, but it has failed miserably on one count: gender equality. Following up on its global report on the latent economic power of creating gender parity that was released in September, global consulting firm Mckinsey has now issued an India-focused report, and the findings are pathetic. The report finds that women's share to India's GDP is only 17%. That's not only less than half of the global average, it's way behind sub-Saharan Africa's 39%. Labor participation numbers are equally dismal. Only 24% of India's women are represented in the labor force, while the global average stands at 40%. This puts India alongside countries in the Middle East and North Africa, which actually have legal restrictions on female employment. The report also points out that while globally women spend roughly 3 times the amount of time spent by men on unpaid work, the gap is closer to 10 times when it comes to India. If this unpaid work done by women were to be quantified, Mckinsey says it works out to at least $300 billion. India has put forward a poor showing pretty much across parameters, from perceived wage gap with male counterparts, to leadership positions, to legal protection, to political representation, to violence. India's women are among the worst affected in the world. Here's another revelation. While states like Mizoram, Meghalaya, Kerala, Goa and Sikkim score high when it comes to women empowerment, states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Assam and Madhya Pradesh are placed at the bottom. So unless the political powers that be pay attention to gender inequality as they hunt for ways to drive economic growth, India stands to lose close to $3 trillion in economic output by the time 2025 rolls around. In New Delhi, Ranajai Banerjee.
Well, pretty dismal statistics there. For more on that, I'm now joined tonight by Madgavkar, Senior Fellow at Mckinsey Global Institute and one of the key authors of that report. And in the studio joining me is Sairee Chahal, founder at Sheroes.in. Great to have both of you joining me here on the big picture. Let me start by asking you, Anu, my first question. One thing that clearly comes out from that report is the fact that the issue of gender inequality is not just a social issue, it's also an economic issue. But do you feel somewhere that this correlation between improving gender equality and economic issues are often lost on our policymakers?
I think the economic impact of narrowing gaps in gender inequality has been the subject of many other very good studies over a period of time. But I think what this particular study does across the world actually, and then for India as well, is really to put the spotlight on multiple drivers of how these gaps in workplace inequality can be bridged. Because it's not just about labor force participation, it's also about the time available to women to work versus men. And it's also about the productivity of women workers because of the sectors that they typically work in, which makes them on average engaged in lower paying jobs and less productive jobs than men. So it's multiple drivers which we look at for the first time in this piece of work. And it's also about setting a very realistic aspiration for how much economic impact we can derive. We size the figure of $700 billion as India's economic impact from narrowing gender inequality by 2025. And we feel that this is realistic because this is not a full potential world in which women play a 50-50 role compared to men. This is the world in which India advances on these various elements of equality at a much faster pace and a pace that we feel is realistic.
Well, in the report, Anu, you also mentioned that globally women spend roughly 3 times the amount of time spent by men doing unpaid work. But in case of India, it's 9.8 times, almost 10 times higher. And if that work was to be valued in economic terms, then it could go up to somewhere around $300 billion in economic output. But how feasible is that, considering the fact that statisticians worldwide have grappled with, with the fact that how to quantify these non-marketable professions?
And that's a very fair point. I think it is a limitation of how we think about valuing work. The indication of $300 billion represented by the unpaid work that Indian women do serves only to underscore that this is a huge contribution. But we should not forget that this is, first of all, merely a conservative estimate. This assumes that there is a very minimal base wage level that we assign to this work. In reality, the value of that work might be more. And we also shouldn't forget that this is unpaid work, which means that women don't get compensated, they don't enjoy the financial independence, the real empowerment that comes from earning and being a consumer that's associated with this work. So really narrowing gaps in gender equality means that we need to make this work easier for women to handle. We need to be able to allow them to save time so that that time can actually be deployed in ways that make them earning members of society. And we also need to make the sharing of this work more equitable across all members of the family so that everyone actually is a participant, right? Both in the elements of the paid economy as well as the unpaid economy.
So then, in effect, you're saying that in reality, if we were to quantify the amount of unpaid work, then it could be well beyond $300 billion.
It is very conservative, and the final number indeed could be more. In fact, it could be much closer to the $700 billion that we size as the total potential economic impact of narrowing gender gaps in work and in society.
Right. Sairee, comment on that then. You know, India has produced some of the most powerful women. We've had Sonia Gandhi, who was perhaps the most powerful Indian for almost 10 years. We have strong chief ministers in the form of Jayalalitha, Mamata Banerjee. But somehow, issues of gender equality still does not seem to permeate our policymakers. Is there a contradiction? On one hand, you've got powerful leaders, and on the other hand, not doing enough?
So there is. I think there are two very distinct observations here. One is a lot of women leaders who come into the limelight, whether it's in business or politics, come from a place of exception and not a norm. And they also land in a place of exception and not a norm. So if you sort of compare the large masses of whether it is the general population or whether it's the parliament, the women are not in majority. They're not even in nowhere near majority. So I think most of these leaders are operating in a place of exception, which means they're really devising their game differently. The focus is very different. And I think it would be a little unfair to expect that just by virtue of them being there, there'll be a lot of changes. I still think there can be better amount of changes, even if the quantum is a little less. But a lot of women leaders in wherever they are actually there to prove their own might. And I think because the fact that they're women leaders, and if they don't prove, I think the double whammy of not having done a good job is very strong.
Then perhaps is there also a case then of women leaders themselves underappreciating the importance of gender equality, because they at the end of the day are also products of the social mindset?
Absolutely. So gender is not so interestingly, all policy making around gender is actually not about gender. Policy making is actually a lot about what contributes to the gender equality, and those factors are very different. Those factors are the larger macro issues. If I may sort of term them, there are six policy issues which impact gender as a result: education, healthcare, transportation, legislation. There is employment, and of course family laws. There's so many things that impact how gender equality shapes up. And it's also a question of, so it's not a policy issue alone. Actually, gender is an issue that starts from home.
Right, exactly. In fact, then to what extent do you think that public policies can help address the social mindset, that India has suffered from for generations? So can public policies in that effect sort of have any impact on this?
Absolutely. I think policy making has a huge role. And I think there are two kinds of paths policy making can tread here. One is what we call suggestive, which is, what do you want to incentivize? What do you want to build upon? So if you want to build a gender equal world, let's do a layout for a gender equal world. Countries who are gender equal are not gender equal because they focus on women empowerment. They focus on building the ecosystem around making it gender equal. So whether it's safe transportation, equal education for everyone,
cultural equality for everyone, healthcare for everyone, and these are important parameters in building a society up or increasing the level of gender equality in each society. And the other is corrective. The fact that we're lagging behind, the fact that there are only 17% GDP participation makes sure that we are far behind, and then we have some corrective work to do. So, and that corrective work can come from two places. One is the good old policy making, let's make a policy, let's roll it out, let's give it to the government. But we live in, this is 2015, we live in a world where technology can bring a huge change. Technology can pretty much fast forward what would have taken us another 20, 25 years in many aspects. So, say Digital India, women working on digital as a medium to sort of get to the forefront, increasing information dissemination, increasing awareness, increasing participation, increasing citizen rights. So I think these are all part of policy making.
Tell us a little bit about the work that you are also doing at Sheroes.in, because you're also in touch with corporate houses. I mean, have you seen a change in their perception levels and their awareness as far as gender equality issues are concerned? Because you are catering solely to women.
Yes, absolutely. So just to give you a little insight into us, we are a career platform for women, and we basically respond to any woman with a career question on her mind who might be looking for mentorship, career resources, opportunities, flexible work, work from home. It's a universe of women and careers. And on the other side, we work with companies. These are large companies, Fortune 500 companies, the big startups, and the small businesses.
Across the belt.
Across the belt. So a small business is not doing it because he's read my policy document. He's doing it because it makes more sense to him. And I think that's the part of pragmatic change we need to do. That people need to contribute into this more proactively without us dangling the policy or the incentive picture there.
Anu, comment on that, because while the statistics that you've shared with us in your report are pretty dismal, but have you done any timeline analysis that traces what India's performance may have been in gender parity, say 5 to 10 years ago? And because that would sort of give us an idea whether gender parity issues whether it's gotten worsened or has it improved in the recent past.
So I think that's a very good question. I think there are 2 points that are worth making in this context. The first is really that we couldn't do a comprehensive time-based analysis simply because we find that across a lot of the indicators that we looked at, there are big data gaps. And this data is really not tracked on an annual basis. And we felt that a time series on this basis didn't do justice to it. So that's not something we did, but we do hope going forward that there is more focus on gender disaggregated data and we are able to build such a time series. But the second and perhaps more interesting point is that we think that there could be a discontinuity here, and that the next 10 years could actually look a lot brighter than the present, or perhaps than the last 10. And this is because we do see that elements like very rapidly increasing financial inclusion and very rapidly increasing digital connectivity through the mobile and through the internet, which are 2, I think, big discontinuities which can improve women's connectivity with the economy and to all sorts of opportunities. We see this progressing quite fast in the next 10 years. And we do see some of these education gaps that I mentioned earlier also narrowing. And therefore, we feel that the picture might be quite a bit brighter in the coming 10 to 15 years compared to the past.
Sairee, just 10 seconds for this. What do you think then is the one most important thing that you think we need to do in terms of addressing gender issues?
I think bring diverse stakeholders on common platforms and use a lot of technology. Just a lot of technology. Use Digital India to do Women Build Digital India.
Okay, thanks so very much, Sairee, and thanks so very much, Anu, for joining us on this discussion. Time to quickly slip into a